It was 1 a.m. The public library was completely silent. Only a few students remained, barely holding on, reading their notes. David was one of them. He was in his first year of college and only had one midterm exam left. It was January, and the cold had hit on North Dakota like never before. You could barely be outside without freezing. However, the library was pleasantly warm thanks to the building's powerful heating system. That, along with the huge pressure David felt for the exam, kept him motivated to stay and keep studying. The silence was absolute, only interrupted by the turning of pages and the wind hitting the windows. David was an ordinary guy. Regular friends, regular hobbies, average grades, a good kid who didn't stand out, neither for better nor worse. He had somehow managed to pass all the midterms so far, something only 5 students in the class had done. David was happy, stressed, but happy. There was only one thing he was missing: a great love. He had a girlfriend in high school, but she broke his heart when she moved out of the States to attend another university. David didn't hold a grudge, but he still hadn't gotten over her. The hours passed, and little by little, the remaining students left the library. David kept looking at his notes. His eyes were closing. He tried to stay awake, but it was becoming impossible. He was with his friend, Michael, who wasn't doing well in his studies, but he was funny and a good guy. He stayed late more to hang out with David than to study. David was already on his 5th coffee of the day. He was pushing the limits, and he knew it. He started nodding off until he finally dozed off, face down on his notes. He woke up suddenly and looked at the clock of the wall. It was 2:30 a.m. He looked around. Michael was gone. In fact, everyone was gone. Everyone except for one person, sitting at the end of his table. It was a long rectangular table. David was at one end, and this person was at the other. It was a girl who looked about his age. David looked at her, trying to see if he recognized her from college. Several things caught his attention. First, and most obvious, she was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen in person. Long platinum blonde hair, emerald green eyes, a perfectly symmetrical face, lips, nose, cheekbones. David even rubbed his eyes. Second, and most important, he didn't recognize her at all. Not only had he never seen her at the library, but she definitely wasn't there before he fell asleep. He was sure of that. There had only been 2 guys sitting at the table before. Had she moved to sit closer to him? Did she wanted him to come and say something to her? Or was he just looking for company? Wherever focus David had left vanished, he couldn't stop looking at her. That worried him. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable. A guy staring at her alone in an empty library at night? Creepy. He tried to look out of the corner of his eye, but the more he looked, the more beautiful she seemed. During one of those glances, the girl looked up and caught him staring. David quickly and awkwardly looked away, which made her smile. He pretended to study. Then she said, "Hi." David greeted her back, still shy. "You also cramming for the end of the midterms?" the girl asked. Yeah, giving my best till the last minute. I don't think I've seen you around there before." She looked at him, for a few seconds, then stood up. She came over and sat in the chair across from him. Maybe you just didn't notice. I am the library's best customer. I think I will have remembered you. Why? David hesitated for a moment, but quickly replied, You don't see many platinum blondes around here. That's it? She asked, resting her cheeks on her knuckles, with the elbows on the table. They both smiled. It was obvious they liked each other. They talked for another half hour. Eventually, they agreed they had studied enough for the night and decided to head home. As they stepped outside, a freezing gust of wind hit their faces. They kept walking and chatting for a few minutes. They had to cross a poorly lit park. Normally I don't go this way. I'm scared of walking alone at night, she said. Well, tonight you have someone to walk you home. And how do I know I can trust you? You haven't even told me your name. Well, you haven't told me yours either, David replied. She stepped a bit closer and, smiling, she said, Veronica. Suddenly, David felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't explain why, but something didn't feel right. And yet he was completely hypnotized by her. They finally entered the park. Several streetlights weren't working. The path was barely visible, and the fog didn't help. Just as they were about to reach the exit, they saw a man lying on the ground, blocking the path. They froze, very concerned. Why? Because in winter, it was common for people to freeze to death. Not just the homeless, but also alcoholics who, after a night of drinking, walked home numbed by the alcohol, passed out, and died of hypothermia. David approached the man lying face down on the icy ground. Veronica grabbed his arm, frightened. David calmed her, and holding her hand, he got closer. He bent down, removing his glove, and placed his hand on the man's neck while asking loudly if he was okay. The man didn't respond. His skin was ice cold. David even tried to check his pulse. And suddenly, the man sprang up, screaming wildly. He grabbed David's wrist with terrifying strength. David panicked and tried to break free. The man was totally out of it, possessed, screaming over and over. No, let me go, please. Let me die already. Let me go. Veronica had fallen back onto the ground, frozen in fear, watching this scene unfold. David finally managed to get free. He grabbed Veronica's hand, and they both ran out of the park while the man kept screaming. They ran for a few minutes until they couldn't hear the man anymore. They stopped in the front of the first building they saw. David tried to calm Veronica down. She was shaking. It's okay. You're safe now. David held her hand. She calmed down, looked him in the eyes, and kissed him. At first, gently, then more passionately. After a few minutes of kissing, David started to notice something strange. At first, her lips were warm as expected, but slowly they started to get colder. Unusually, when it's cold outside, your lips go numb and kissing warms you up, not the other way around. David had his eyes closed. Then Veronica started laughing. At first, softly, quietly, without stopping the kiss. David felt another chill run down his spine as her sweet, angelic voice started to sound deeper looked like a witch. He opened his eyes and saw her. Veronica had turned into a disgusting old woman, full of warts and sores, and she reeked of root. She looked at him with a twisted grin, pointing a crooked finger at him. David was in shock. Suddenly, he woke up from the table. He was back in the library. Terrified, he looked around. A few people were still there. He checked the clock. It was 1:15 a.m. He had already been asleep for 15 minutes. Michael looked at him confused, then laughed a little. Everything was just as before. Around 10 people still in the library. It had all been a dream, a terrible dream. He breathed a deep sigh of relief. He kept studying for a while. He glanced to the end of the table. The girl wasn't there. Of course she's not, you idiot, David muttered himself. Girls like that don't exist. That stuff only happens in dreams or movies. An hour passed, and more people left the library. Michael had had enough. He knew he wouldn't pass the exam tomorrow, so he said goodbye to David and left. David checked the time. It was 2:30 a.m. He only had one topic left to review, but it was taking him longer than it should. He just couldn't stop thinking about that dream. It had felt too real. He remembered a class where they talk about night terrors, the worst kind of nightmare. He didn't recall ever having one, but, well, there's a first time for everything. He kept flipping the pages, but he wasn't really reading. He could only see the face of that girl, so beautiful and perfect. Even though the dream had ended horribly, it had been worth it just to see someone that stunning. David smiled. He was good at seeing the bright side of things. He was just about to pack his notes and leave when he saw something that froze him in place. Behind a bookshelf full of books, he noticed there was still someone else in the library. She was far away and turned around. He could only see part of her leg and some of her hair. David packed up his things, stood up, and slowly walked over. He peeked around the shelf. It couldn't be. It was that beautiful blonde girl. David felt his blood run cold. He could almost feel those icy lips on his again. He nearly gagged, remembering that horrible stench. The girl turned her head and saw David like he was a ghost. She flinched and looked scared. "What's wrong?" she asked, frightened and confused. David snapped back to reality. He was scaring a random girl in an almost empty building late at night. He felt ashamed and quickly changed his expression. "Sorry, I thought you were someone else." David left the building in a hurry, not looking back. About a minute later, he heard a voice behind him. He stopped in his tracks. Footsteps were coming toward him, fast. David turned around quickly. It was a girl, running toward him. Turning it out, he had forgotten his pencil case. This kind girl had chased him down to return it. David thanked her and offered to walk her home. She happily agreed. She was friendly, not as captivating as in his dream, but still very sweet. They crossed the park, this time without an incident. David figured out what had probably happened. He must have seen her when he entered the library, but because of the stress, caffeine, and lack of sleep, he didn't remember it consciously. But his subconscious had. When they were almost at David's place, the girl stopped in front of a doorway. "This is it. My building." David looked up at the door. "Wow, what a coincidence," he said out loud. "Coincidence?" the girl asked. David lied so she wouldn't feel weird. He said an old friend of his used to live here. The truth? It was the exact same doorway from the dream. She was about to enter the building when David stopped her. "Hey, wait! You never told me your name." The girl froze, completely still for about 5 seconds. Then, she slowly turned around. She was smiling. "My name?" she said. David felt a chill down his spine. That smile was not normal. His eyes were too wide. She wasn't blinking. "My name is Veronica." Silence. David felt like he couldn't move. Veronica stood about 10 feet away, far but somehow too close. David laughed nervously. After a few seconds, he said, Well, see you next time, Veronica." He slowly started walking home. Something felt off. He hadn't heard her move, or the door close. He wanted to turn around, but fear kept him going forward. Finally, once he had walked far enough, he looked back. No one. The light in the doorway was off. David sighed in relief. He was exhausted. Clearly, the stress had messed with his head. He kept walking and then... Veronica was right in front of him. David screamed as she grabbed his shoulders with both hands, pulling him toward her. He screamed, helpless. Veronica opened her huge mouth, revealing sharp, pointed teeth. She sunk her jaws into David's neck. He screamed in panic, breathing. David stood up from his seat, screaming and crying. He was back in the library. His friend Michael looked at him, startled, just like everyone else in the room. David looked at the clock. 1:15 a.m. It was impossible, completely impossible. He was terrified, gasping from air. But then, under all those stares, he felt a sharp, burning sense of second-hand embarrassment that helped calm him down. "Dude, are you okay?" Michael asked. David smiled awkwardly and said, "Yeah, turns out that biochemistry is really scary." He laughed it off and sat back down, pretending to study for a while. A bit later, he packed up, saying goodbye to Michael, and headed home fast. It was freezing outside. He passed through the park, almost running. He passed that doorway, but didn't even look at it. He got home, locked the door, and went straight to his room and got into bed. He was still terrified, but exhaustion beat fear and intrusive thoughts, and finally he fell asleep. He woke up suddenly. He looked at the alarm clock. 7 a.m. He showered, got dressed, ate breakfast, and headed to college for the exam. He was paranoid, still replaying that nightmare in his head. What scared him the most was the possibility it had been an schizophrenic episode. They hadn't covered that in class yet, but he had done some research on his own. He was terrified of mental illness. He sat for the exam, the nerves and pressured, help him forget about that nightmare, for 2 hours at least. The bell rang. Everyone put down their pens. David left the classroom, looking for Michael, who had taken the test in another room. He spotted him in the crowd and walked over. They chatted, relieved to be done with the midterms. They went to the cafeteria, got some coffee, and sat at the table. They joked around for a bit, laughed. Then, while Michael was telling him a story, David saw her. That blonde girl. He couldn't believe it. All the bad vibes came flooding back. He stared at her, eyes wide. She sat at the back, alone at a table. She didn't look at him. She pulled out a book and started reading. "Are you listening to me?" Michael interrupted. "Sorry," David said. "You're not gonna believe this. I had a horrible nightmare last night. You see that girl?" David pointed toward the blonde girl. Michael turned to look. "So, last night, when I stood up screaming in the library and totally embarrassed myself, sorry about that, by the way, it was because I had a nightmare about her." Michael looked at him, very confused. David went on. "In the dream, she tried to kill me. Crazy, right? Obviously, I must have seen her around before, and with all this stress, my brain just messed it with me." Michael looked back, then back at David, even more confused. "Dude, what the hell are you talking about?" David blinked. "First of all, I don't remember you screaming in the library last night. You know me. I've never stepped foot in a library. My grades prove it. And second, what girl? There's no one over there." David froze. He looked back. The girl was still there. He glared at Michael. "Not funny, dude." "What's not funny?" Michael replied, worried. "You are the one acting weird." David rubbed his eyes. He had massive dark circles. He looked again. No one was there. Michael spoke gently. "Okay, dude. You need to sleep. We'll celebrate tomorrow, okay?" David forced a smile, eyes back on his coffee. Michael tried to lighten the mood. "You're unbelievable. Aced all your exams, and the first blonde girl to smile at you makes you lose your mind." David looked up. "How do you know she was blonde?" "You just told me." David paused. "Right, that's true. Silly me." He faked a laugh. He looked down at his coffee. Did I really tell him that? He thought. "Cut the coffee, dude," Michael said. "You need tea and a 24-hour nap." "You're right." Bending down to grab his backpack. And then he saw her. Veronica was crouching under the back table, staring at him. David stood up from his chair, looked again. Gone. She was gone. "What now? There's nothing there." He slammed it back in frustration. "You have to stop this. She's not real, David. Veronica doesn't exist." David stared at him, trembling. "I never told you her name." Michael replied instantly. "Yes, you did. You have been saying it all day." David's voice dropped. "I just told you just now." Michael stood up and yelled. "No! You've been talking about her all day!" Everyone in the cafeteria looked at them. "Keep it down," Michael whispered. "Why?" People are staring, please. There is no one here, David. The cafeteria went silent. Not a single voice. David looked around. No one. He looked at Michael. He was glaring at him, breathing hard. David couldn't move. He was paralyzed in his chair. "What's happening?" he whispered. Michael's angry face softened into something worse. A smile, a twisted, eerie smile. He sat back down calmly. "Nothing's wrong, David. You just need to do one more thing." David was clinging to the chair like he was fused to it. He wanted to run, but his body wouldn't move. After a long pause, Michael said, "You just have to turn around to wake up." David shut his eyes and began to cry. He didn't want to turn around, but his body moved on his own. He slowly turned. He woke up again and again. David was trapped forever in the same endless loop.